special podcast today. I wanted to share with you a special guest, Nicholas Niespodziani. Thanks so much for joining us. How you doing today, man?
I am smooth as ever.
He's got the smooth radio voice. The title for this podcast is ultimately, is the term yacht rock reductive or perhaps a subtle insult to the music? If you're really fancy, like Wikipedia pointed out, is the term yacht rock pejorative? That's like your $3 word for the day. Now, I wanted to kind of set this up with a little bit of a story from myself. So when I first met my wife, she was into a lot of different bands, and I think it's really important when you first start dating someone to figure out kind of music they listen to, right? And she had a very unique proposition. She said she liked Steely Dan, Michael McDonald, Kenny Loggins, Doobie Brothers, but also, Bread and this band America, and these type of like soft rock bands. And I thought that was very interesting. I hadn't really met someone like that before. And needless to say, we're married now, so I've accepted that part about her. But I nicknamed that genre at the time, this is many years ago, men's with mullets and mustaches. That was really kind of the vibe when you looked at the cover art and this kind of thing. So as time passes, go to a couple concerts, we're doing this and doing that. And then she's like, hey, you should really check out this music that I'm interested in. It's called yacht rock. It's like this new term that's come out. It's kind of what I like to listen to. So we start going to some yacht rock concerts in the Los Angeles area where we were listening. And one of those bands was Yacht Rock Revue, which Nick is a founding member of out of Atlanta. And then more recently, there was a documentary on HBO, Yacht Rock, the documentary, DOCKUM documentary. It was a really interesting one. Nick, I think I saw you guys in there. Are you in the actual footage there?
I made a cameo, yes.
At the end of that, there is a kind of interesting conversation with Donald Fagan of Steely Dan, where he seems a little bit upset about being interviewed for the documentary. And that was very curious. And so I brought that up on a couple of our interviews here on the show. And lo and behold, people in my industry, in the industry here in high-end audio, are also quite invested in this idea of the term yacht rock. And in fact, I found with a lot of people, it just ruffles feathers when you bring it up. So the reason I want to have Yacht Rock and Nick on the show is because when you go see the different kind of presentations of this, I would say, Nick, from experiences at your show, there is an authenticity to the presentation that it just seems a little bit to me like more than just heavy drinking metaphors and captain hats. You really like turn the venue into a house of worship, but the hymns are like from the mid 70s and 80s. Also, your performance is like top tier. And I mean, not just for a cover band, but for like any band out there. There's blaring sax solos and coordinated dance move and like next level musicianship. Kicking it off here, kind of tell me how you got into this genre and how you really elevated to an art form all of itself in terms of like just playing covers.
I like to think of us as, it's good we're on this podcast because we are the hi-fi version of a yacht rock band. We're the high fidelity version. We came about this completely by accident. We weren't setting out to create a cover band or create a movement or anything like that. We were going to do a one-off show called 70s AM Gold. And a few days before a couple weeks, I guess, before we did the show, we discovered the YouTube series Yacht Rock and said, oh, that's a good name for it. We'll just call it that. And it's a good thing we did because I think that branding is such a key reason that this genre has made the comeback that it has. And we just went from there. Here we are, 17 years later.
Today's episode is brought to you by Expona 2025. America's largest high-fidelity audio show takes place April 11th, 12th, and 13th at the Schaumburg Convention Center near Chicago, Illinois. Plan a trip to the Windy City this spring and discover over 200 listening rooms of high-end audio equipment and explore the latest in headphone hi-fi and Expona's ear gear experience. New this year, get a look behind the show curtain on Expona's Audio Insider podcast. Get an exclusive sneak peek at Expona 2025, where leading manufacturers unveil their latest gear, share captivating stories, and give you a preview of what's in store. Don't miss out on the insider access to North America's biggest audio event of the year. Visit Expona.com for details on where to listen or watch. Tickets are available now at Expona.com. That's www.axpona.com. Today's episode is brought to you by Focal Name America, a North American distributor. With the collaboration of two industry icons, Focal, the French brand known for high-end audio for home, car, professional, and marine, and Name Audio, the iconic British hi-fi brand. Other brands distributed include Musical Fidelity, Thorens, Avid Hi-Fi, Absolutement, BDI, and Vico Acoustic. Visit FocalNameAmerica.com for your home audio and custom installation needs.
Riding on the rhythms like yachts upon the bay, voices in harmony, every word they say.
So, wow. So you've been doing it for 17 years. Had you been in other cover bands at the time? What was ultimately like the progression of popularity? Was this like an explosion, or did it kind of like have a slow burn to it?
We had all been in different indie rock bands. Peter, my co-frontman, and I, the co-leader of the band, we had a band called YOU here in Atlanta that was pretty popular, and we did some touring and opened up for big bands, and it seemed for a while like maybe we were going to make it, but we never made it. And so everything was kind of splintering. We were all heading off to do other things with our lives when Yacht Rock became a thing, and the club that we played at said, you need to do this every Thursday, to which I replied, I think that's a bad idea. But we tried it, and it became, there was a scene in between like 2008 and 2012 where every Thursday night it would just be this pandemonium in this basement club of people just urgently needing to hear Jerry Rafferty and Gary Wright and 10cc and all these bands. And we were learning how to play this music, how to present it, because it was a group of good musicians to begin with. But this stuff takes a certain mix of approach where you have to be very musically talented and skilled and accurate. But if you're too precious with it, it sounds like elevator music. So you have to find, it took us that 4 years. It was like our cavern club of every Thursday night, just going through it and figuring it out. And we came out on the other side, the Yacht Rock Revue.
Oh, well, yeah, I totally agree. There's not every song is hard, but I definitely think let me ask you this while I got you on here. Of all the bands, is there one that's particularly hard? Because I'm going to guess my audience and others would go for Steely Dan out of the lot. But is there a couple of titles that you're just like, this takes a lot of skill? Not to mention the level of harmonies that are involved with all of these songs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Steely Dan is obviously musically complicated, right? Mm-hmm. But then there are other bands where it's less obvious, like the song Whenever I Call You Friend by Kenny Loggins. Very high degree of difficulty, several modulations, all sorts of harmonies. And Kenny was really into those same complex chords that Steely Dan was, just in a more pop setting. And Michael McDonald's stuff, also very complex. I think that even the stuff that sounds simple in the yacht rock genre tends to have some kind of underlying musical complexity to it that is covered by the pop sheen on top of it.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like a combination of the technicalities of like prog rock, but with just a little more listenability to it, a little more pop on top of it. I like that, yeah.
I mean, these were the best musicians of their time. These were the elite players in Los Angeles at the time that were making this music.
Yeah, one of the reasons it's such a popular category for this podcast is because the production value was exceptional. And again, especially for the time. I mean, they weren't coming out of like the Beatles era, obviously. They had a little more technology to help them along. But they were taking time to make sure this stuff sounded good, it sounded clean. And it's still, I think to this day, people would argue, is some of the best sounding rock at least to come out ever.
The budgets were unlimited. The cocaine was unlimited. I mean, they had it all, you know?
And they had a time and they had a place. And this is kind of like what we were talking about for your band as well. The time and the place. I want to go back to my story about your performance. I think that was really interesting when the pandemic hit. I don't know if you know this, but the Yacht Rock Revue, the last show I saw before the pandemic hit, was a Yacht Rock Revue. And your album, Hot Dads in Tight Jeans, had come out. And there was a track on that I found particularly interesting about when we talk about timing, and it was Bad Tequila. This album comes out, I go to your show, I buy the vinyl, and it had this song Bad Tequila, and it was just like that zeitgeist at the time. It was like, to me, it was almost like the Ted Lasso of music, because it had like this really upbeat kind of fun song, and it was positive in a way, but not being overly cheesy. It's like you get the metaphor, it's right there, and it's not like too much. What kind of went into the making of that song, and what was the timing for you?
I mean, as a musician, putting out an album 3 weeks before the pandemic hit was debilitating. It was crushing, right? Like we had put so much effort into writing and recording these songs, and to not be able to then turn around and tour was very, very difficult. But in that experience, Bad Tequila became basically like our pandemic anthem. We started doing these individual shows from each of our home studios, live stream shows. A new group coalesced around these shows called the Anchorheads, and they were incredibly supportive. They helped keep our band and our crew all having health care throughout the pandemic, which was crucial. And Bad Tequila became kind of the anthem for that, because it was, life gives you bad tequila, you make a good margarita. And when I was writing it, I actually had alternate lyrics because I was a little afraid to even take something that silly to the band. But it just felt so natural when you sang it, and the vibe fit so well. And, we do have a party band, so might as well go for it. And we did. And I think it works in its own special way.
I will say this. Hot Dads in Tight Jeans, for me, it was just this perfect synergy of like, my expectations were very like, oh, it's a cover band, and it seemed like from the cover art that you were embracing is going to be an extension of Yacht Rock. But what I didn't expect was the level of songwriting, and exactly what you said, like a party anthem, but without making it too silly. Like the way the songs land is very relaxing to me. Not that they lack energy, but that there's not this type of like, it's not overly campy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a challenge there, because you don't want to make a jokey album, right? But you also, if you're Yacht Rock, how seriously can you take yourself? And then there's also like, how Yacht Rock do you make it? If you make songs that sound exactly like Steely Dan songs, I know I personally would much rather just listen to Steely Dan than listen to someone trying to sound like Steely Dan. So kind of riding that middle ground between all of those things, threading that needle, was the challenge, and continues to be the challenge for us in creating our own music. But it's a challenge that we welcome, and we have fun going for it.
When you consider the performance itself at the shows, what do you think is the most appropriate blessing or like presentation for a cover? Because I feel like a lot of people look at a cover and say, I want to make it my own. And I feel like that's that low-hanging fruit that everyone wants to do, because, at least in my opinion, and especially with these songs, making it sound like the original is extremely hard. And I felt like you guys did an amazing representation. But what's your opinion on kind of like making it your own? Or do you feel like, as like the most prestigious cover band I've ever seen, do you feel like you owe it to the music to kind of land it exactly as such?
We definitely have a lot of attention to detail, but the way we like to approach it is we like to first learn the song exactly as it has been recorded, and then decide from there what of our own sauce we're going to pour onto it. Is it going to be a little bit faster? Are we going to add a guitar part to make it feel more aggressive? Are we going to medley it with another song, or are we going to completely change a section? We learn it, and we pay it tribute exactly at first, and then grow it into our own from there. I think a lot of times when people like want to make it their own, it's because they can't pull off what the original actually did, right? So We never want to do our own version for that reason.
That's exactly the point I was getting. I mean, I want to say it like that, but that's the reason. A lot of people, I mean, there are really great covers that change it up, and you're like, that's different. But really, I think when most people hear it, they know immediately if it's better or not. And, you know, with YouTube, and you're right, the difficulty is definitely there.
My favorite little story with that, my favorite time of multiple fans, really telling me that we had created our own version is when we were on tour opening for Kenny Loggins on his final tour. The most common question I got from fans, you know, in emails and messages on the internet or even in person is Kenny Loggins going to let you sing Heart to Heart? Because they all thought that we had made Heart to Heart our own song in such a magnetic way that it would be natural for Kenny Loggins on his final tour to let us sing one of his biggest songs. And I was like, I mean, I was always very flattered, but I was like, obviously, no, that's not happening.
So I think that's a very important element to kind of show the level of acceptance as we kind of talk about, is this a reductive term, right? At some level, and it's worth noting that Loggins was involved with the documentary, some of the artists are very accepting of this term. Now, I would love for you to give me a little of your color commentary on what do you feel is the vibe of the audience that comes. So I think it's understood that it's kind of a party, but do you agree that there's also a certain amount of reverence given to the music? Or do you think, if you had to guess maybe a percentage, well, people are there just to get wasted and which are there for the music?
Oh, these days, very few just to get wasted. I think our concerts have taken on a completely different life from that, but that is how it started, right? Like those basement parties that I was talking about in the beginning, there was a lot of irony and guys wearing mustaches because they thought it was funny and like elbowing each other with a wink and a nod when we would sing whatever song they thought was cheesy. There was a period, and I think that was kind of like peak irony, like peak internet irony era, and that's kind of what the Yacht Rock YouTube series started as. But the love that those guys had for the music was obvious in their knowledge of it and the way that they talked about it. And I think the love that we had for the music, even though we were kind of part of the joke or whatever at the beginning, was obvious because of how we approached the songs. And as we began to start meeting some of the guys that made these songs, every one of them was skeptical at first because their only reference was the YouTube that they thought was maybe making fun of them. But as they understood that this movement had a lot more to do with the musicianship and the greatness of the songwriting and a band that really carried that forward in performance, you know, more and more of these guys kind of bought into the Yacht Rock as not something that's a joke.
Yeah, well put. I feel like one of the things that maybe had, I don't know, a nod that it isn't a joke is they named an XM station after it. A Sirius XM station is named Yacht Rock. And I just feel like they would have done at least a little bit of research before they put out something slanderous as the title for the station. So if that,
right, but even their station though, they have like that kind of smarmy DJ guy with a voice and like the whole, like he does kind of take it like maybe one step too far in that ironic kind of narrative that he gives between the songs, you know? And I think that that's something that is exactly what turns off, you know, Robbie Dupree when I first got in touch with him and he was like, "What are you doing?" And we were like, "No, just come see us." And then when he did, he was like, "Oh, okay, this is awesome." You know, I think not almost every single one of the Yacht Rock guys, once they saw us in person, immediately understood what it was really about.
Yeah, and I think part of the confusion might be, too, that term, it's rare because it didn't exist when the music was originally popular. It wasn't something that the artists themselves were accustomed to or had adapted. It's something that came later. And I think maybe if it's so close to your heart, you have a hard time accepting that, like, this thing might not be what you wanted it to be at the time. But I also think there's an element to it where it's like, do the maybe I'd love you to weigh in on this too. Do you think that the musicians own the music when we're talking about Donald Fagan's, reaction at the end of the documentary? Do you think that he still owns that music in the sense, or is it more like the music, it belongs to the people, or the music belongs to the audience that comes to your shows now in this moment?
I think with any art, once you put it out into the world, it's no longer yours. It's what the world makes of it. I mean, and that's true from artists as big as the Beatles down to Robbie Dupree and Donald Fagan and Yacht Rock, like anyone. Once it's out there, it's what the public makes of it, and it becomes something different. Now, in the case of Yacht Rock, for it to become something different or be classified differently so many years after is certainly a cultural anomaly. I don't know if there's another genre of music that was invented 40 years after the music itself was created. And I think it could only really happen in the era of the internet, because you couldn't go digging for all of these deep yacht rock cuts in the dollar bin, in the year 1998. You wouldn't have been able to do yacht rock the same way you can do it now.
Today's episode is brought to you by Dr. Vinyl. Dr. Vinyl is a Maryland-based audio retailer that offers a wide range of hand-selected analog products, including the fabulous Integrity Hi-Fi True Glider Tone Arm. Schedule a doctor's appointment today by calling 844-378-4695 or visiting drvinyl.net. That's drvinyl.net. This episode of the Occasional Podcast is brought to you by Fernan Roby, a hi-fi designer, manufacturer, and dealer in Richmond, Virginia, where they have been producing heirloom-quality audio equipment and accessories since 2010. Each Fernan Roby piece is meticulously crafted for you to enjoy your favorite music with friends and family. Follow them at Fernan Roby on all social platforms for a behind-the-scenes look at their process, or visit fernandroby.com to see their craftsmanship for yourself. Do you have any opinion on the tight parameters that were kind of given around? There's another podcast that's, yacht or not, this type of idea. What's your reaction to that, those tight parameters that they give to Yacht Rock? Do you think that it's something very specific, or do you kind of feel like it's something maybe bigger than that?
I mean, that's for academics to argue. I'm not, my job is to get on stage and have a good time and make sure that everybody there has a good time. And I'm not afraid to go outside the strict definition of yacht rock to do that. I think that to me, it's more about a vibe and an energy and a spirit than it is about, being soft rock music made by session musicians in Southern California between 1976 and 1984.
Do you guys have internal conversations when you might take on a new song, if this is appropriate or too far off the center, or is it just like, how do you guys determine what the set list is?
Yeah, I mean, most of the, we've done probably 400 or 500 yacht rock songs at this point, so most of the low-hanging, like, real yacht rock songs we've done. And every now and then we're finding one that's a big one that we haven't done. We haven't done all the deep cuts. We haven't done Answering Machine by Rupert Holmes, or, we haven't done Pages or things like that, like bands that are yacht rock that get played on the station that most people aren't familiar with. But most of the big stuff we've done. But, as a performer, what I love about this gig is we can surprise people. When you go to see Hall & Oates, they're going to play Rich Girl. They're going to play She's Gone. When you come to see us, we have hundreds of songs to choose from. You don't really know. And if we surprise you by playing a Queen song at the end of the set or a Boston song at the end of the set, if you've been through the previous 2 hours with us, it makes sense in the context of what we do, and it works. And so that's why we're not afraid to, pick off a Whitney Houston song or whatever it is and make it work all in this context of a yacht rock show.
So I think you addressed this earlier, but your experience in working directly with the people of this area, the artists, is that they initially did meet the idea with a little bit of skepticism, but when they saw this type of level of musicianship I was talking about, that's presenting it to a new audience, they were all kind of on board. Or have you met someone who's been like, this term is too offensive to me, I refuse to even, work with you or talk with you, or whatever that case might be? Have you come across that in real life?
Not in person. I mean, we have reached out to artists who have said, working with you guys is a non-starter because of the yacht rock thing or cover band or whatever it is. And, I'm not begrudging any of these great artists their opinion on that. That's totally fine with us. But every one of them who's ever seen us buys into what we do and believes in it and understands it in a different way, like without exception. No one has ever come to our show and been like, oh, you guys stink, or oh, you guys are a joke, or you're not doing the music justice, like 0 times ever.
Yeah. Oh, man. And that's exactly what I was kind of thinking when I saw you. And honestly, I think maybe some of the audience members go through that same process, because I was actually like down, like, hey, if it's just a party, I'll honestly go for a party. There are other LA cover bands that do this. I don't know if you guys do this. I hope this isn't offensive, but they sell the hats, right? Do you guys sell the hats?
I mean, my kids got to eat, man. Come on.
Okay.
We sell the hats, yep, but we don't wear the hats ourselves.
That is the difference.
That's
they're
the
on
difference.
Stage. Yes. They're on stage. I was at the Viper Room, I think it was, with Yacht Crew, and I was downstairs in the basement, and there's like another bar there, and it's like a low ceiling. It's very LA, right? And there's a guy, and he's all worked up, and if you've been or spent any time on the Sunset Boulevard there, there are like these time capsule outfits that people wear that are like reminiscent of the like hair metal bands, and they wear this out, like a uniform. And this guy was kind of that ilk, and he then proceeded, he was really worked up, and I leaned in, I heard his conversation. He's like, I came here expecting Motley Crue cover band, and they just simply, couldn't they just play one Motley Crue song? He was so worked up because he thought it was a Motley Crue band, and it was still a really great time. But again, a contrast from really the Wilt. I think. Do you have a favorite place to play? We could say L.A. or other, because I thought personally the Wilshire Theater.
It was the Wiltern.
Oh, Wiltern, yeah.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Yeah. It was just gorgeous, yeah.
Oh, man, I loved the Wiltern. We had the honor on the... Which tour was it? It was the tour this last summer with Train and REO Speedwagon. We had the honor of playing at the LA Forum, where Magic Johnson won all of his titles. Where Prince had a residency. Playing in that place was absolutely epic. Like, among the most amazing places I've ever played. Up there with Pier 17 in New York and the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville as my favorite places to play.
Oh, that's so great, man. I don't know what it's like performing there, but I really enjoy the Hollywood Bowl for music. That's my jam up there. But
that's on my bucket list. We haven't done Hollywood Bowl yet.
Have you been there?
I have been to the Hollywood Bowl, yes. That place is incredible.
I digress, but we saw Loggins,
Christopher Cross, and probably Michael McDonald.
Michael McDonald. That was it. Again, the vibe at that show, it's when you look around, like these people are like so happy. And I am sure that happens at every concert. There are happy people, but like it's not rowdy. And they're just like maybe it's in this intangible thing that I'm imagining because I've been smoking weed all evening. But it's just like the people there seem like they're having a really good time, a really good vibe, and just like exceptionally happy. And again, those were some tough times that we all went through collectively as a community. So I think that like it was the right place, right time for it to even get bigger. Now, on that note, do you feel like maybe the golden resurgence, like the golden era of the resurgence has peaked? Or do you find that like this thing is still growing?
Every year I think, can it get any bigger than this? Like, this is crazy. We're opening for Kenny Loggins, and then, wow, this is crazy. We're playing with Train and REO Speedwagon in these giant amphitheaters. Like, every time I think that our career has reached the highest it can possibly reach, it keeps going. And I don't know, I think we exist a little bit outside of the trend of the genre at this point. But the documentary on HBO just came out last year. So whatever it is, I'm happy that it continues to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to like overdo the flattery here, but I from my experience on this planet, there has never been a better cover band or a more deserving cover band than what you guys have managed to do. But like, seriously, you've done something that has brought joy and like value to music in a genre that's tied with happiness enough where the whole vibe is like great. And I just appreciate that very much. So kudos to you guys for being on this wave resurgence again. That's just so fun. I have a more specific question for you. What is the doobie bounce?
The doobie bounce is the kind of comfortable beat that you hear on a lot of these yacht rock songs. Like, the most iconic doobie bounce is "What a Fool Believes" by the Doobie Brothers. That's the original bounce, right? And it's a pretty straight beat actually, but it's got this like just little touch of swing to it. And you hear it on "Steal Away" by Robbie Dupree. You hear it on so many songs in this genre. And it's kind of like a beat. It's like the New Jack Swing beat, except for yacht rock.
Now, one of the other things I talk about on this podcast quite often is the best way to support the bands you love. The question that comes up in this area is digital versus vinyl. And what I like to say, and it would be great if you could help out with this, is like, if you want to test the waters with digital streaming, that's great, but musicians tend to not make a lot of streaming money. If you want to vote for your band, if you want to support for your band, you buy the vinyl, you buy the CD. Is there any other color you can add to that? Because the next level, I was assuming, which I have no way of verifying, but maybe you could help me with, is that buying it at the show itself, instead of through a retailer, increases that endorsement. Would you say that's accurate? And are there any other ways to help support your favorite bands?
All of those are extremely accurate. I mean, streaming isn't great, but if it's streaming or not, then stream. I would love more people to hear our album, Escape Artist. And if streaming is the way to do it, if you don't have a record player, that's totally fine. But if you stream it and you love it and you want to support the band, then definitely buy the record. Not only because it supports the band, but because it's got beautiful artwork.
Mm-hmm. Really beautiful. Tell me a little bit about the new album, Escape Artist. It came out a couple of months back, 6 months or 7 months, 5 months ago. When you go into that sophomore experience, what did you think you wanted to achieve with that? Now that you had like a little more, volume behind you.
Yeah, conceptually, we were just going for something a little more broad. Like Hot Dads and Tight Jeans was very pop oriented, kind of trying to track that middle ground between yacht rock and modern indie pop, basically. And for Escape Artists, we were thinking about the idea of escaping from this box that people want to put us in as a cover band, or not, as interpreters rather than as creators ourselves. And so we gave ourselves permission to just go for whatever. And I think that comes through partly in the fact because there are 21 songs and we didn't cut ourselves off of anything, right? We just went for it, and it was really fun and very, very fulfilling musically to get to make an album like that. It was kind of in the spirit of these old yacht rock albums, in that we were at our friend's studio here in Atlanta, and we had basically unlimited studio time. We had no timeline that we had to stick to, so we had this complete artistic freedom to just go for it.
Do you enjoy your time in the studio creating as much as touring, or how does that work? Because you have this amazing touring experience, and then you have to take the time out of that to do this original work in between, or what's your preference? You like your time in the studio, or is it more like the album is the thing that you really like to have and mixed in with the performance?
Man, I love being in the studio. I love creating, like that moment of creation when you have an idea or come up with just the right guitar part and you're laying it down and you're just feeling, you're in the flow, you're feeling that moment. There's nothing like it. It's akin to being on stage and having that moment with the audience. It's on that same level. So they're completely different experiences, but push a lot of the same buttons for me. So I feel thankful that I have a career where I can balance both of those things.
When you think about the album as a whole, do you intentionally try to have a couple of poppier or more mainstream ideas in songs that you can anchor the album around? Or is it more you write all the songs and then you go through and you go, oh no, this one's really good and that? Or do you go into it thinking, man, I need to write a really banger single?
Certainly there are, every album you go in thinking which songs are the singles. But then when you come out on the other side, you weren't always right about which ones ended up being the singles as they become realized. With this album, some of them were obvious, like San Junipero is a pretty obvious single tune. It's got a lot of hooks. When we were creating that song, we knew we had something really special. The song Tropical Illusion that ended up being the first single that we wrote with Elliot from Looking Glass was not necessarily on our radar as a single. But when we finished it, it was so smooth and so yachty. It felt like just the most, and we weren't trying to create a self-consciously yachty yacht rock song. It's just that's the way that song developed in the studio. And it felt so natural and right that it ended up being the single, and it's the tune we play most often in the live shows, and people love that song when we play it live. There's a connection that it has with the music that we cover that just makes a bunch of sense, and it's been really rewarding to get to do that this past year, playing that song.
What song off of Hot Dads in Tight Jeans, just for my own curiosity, do you usually get the biggest reaction from the audience live?
Step is our most popular song on streaming that we've ever had. I think partly because my sister made a great video for it, and partly because it's the message of it is just very much kind of in line with the things you were talking about at our show. It's positive, it's uplifting, but it's also very kind of yachty and like poolside disco kind of vibes. And so when we do Step, it goes over really, really well.
Are you a lyrics first guy or a music first guy? And then the one other caveat to that question I have is, do you make up nonsensical words to fill the space in while you're working on the melody? These are 3 techniques that I've kind of seen in other interviews.
Yeah, definitely. I'm usually a music first guy, although sometimes if I have the hook, I will kind of build the music around that. Bad Tequila is an example of that. I was on a treadmill. I just specifically remember the moment. I was on a treadmill in suburban Chicago. I had gotten stuck at a different hotel from everybody else because they were out of rooms. And so it was the next morning, and I was by myself, and I was running on this treadmill, and I was like, man, when life gives you bad tequila, you make a good margarita. And I was like, oh, that's a song. And so I immediately, literally as I was running, started writing the song in my mind. And it pretty much came out exactly as it is on the treadmill. It was crazy.
That's awesome. This is, again, another obscure concept, but when you are songwriting and you're hitting those moments, I think it's been described, at least for some artists, that you're more of a conduit and less of the creator. Do you ever feel that with your own songwriting, that you're tapping into something greater than yourself during that process?
Man, I'd like to think so. It depends how many gummies I've had. But yes, I mean, I think that's the ultimate for an artist, right? When you feel like this song was always out there in the world, it was just your job to pull it out of the ether and give it life for other people. And I've had definitely some moments of songwriting where it feels that way. That is the best feeling. That's like playing the encore, right, at the show. That's the feeling.
The Doobie Brothers, better post or pre Michael McDonald?
Oh, man. it's like two different bands. I mean, it's like Fleetwood Mac before Lindsay and Stevie.
Totally.
It's not even the same thing. Yeah. And the fact that they tour and do songs from both eras now is still for me a little bit difficult to wrap my head around, because I love those early songs, but that's like classic rock, like, you know, almost in the same genre as Allman Brothers or something. Whereas like the Michael McDonald era of Doobie Brothers is, you know, Kenny Loggins and Steely Dan style. I don't know. It's like, pick one, an orange or a beer. I like both.
Okay. You've probably been asked this question a ton, but I'm gonna do it anyways. What is your favorite obscure yacht rock song?
Sure. I mean, my favorite yacht rock song to perform is always whichever song we learned most recently.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, whichever one is new. So lately we just brought back Nights on Broadway by the Bee Gees. So that one's been my favorite lately because I love that song. And we used to play it like way back in the day, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but hadn't played it in forever. And we just brought it back, and it's so funky. It's been a banger. Yeah. As far as an obscure yacht rock song, I mean, it's not that obscure, but I love Year of the Cat by Al Stewart. That one's kind of a sneaky, great yacht rock song.
During the pandemic, you guys do live stream songs from your house. How did these virtual performances kind of shape your relationship with the fan base?
The pandemic was an incredible blessing, ironically, in that regard, because I think it's what took our band to a different level. Like before that, we had fans who would come to our shows, but it felt like we were more nameless and faceless, and they felt that way too, right? It was more about the genre or whatever. But during the pandemic, like, it got more personal for us. They were inside our houses with us. They were, you know, I was singing songs with my kids. I was talking about what was going on with me that week. And that's not the kind of thing you can do in a normal yacht rock show. So it created this connection. And so now we have this group of super fans called the Anchorheads, who are basically like our fan club. And they're incredible. They give us an amazing amount of energy. They're in front for every show, and they set the tone for the entire rest of the audience. And they're such a welcoming, amazing community. I think that brings people into our band in a way that we never had before. Like I just did a live stream to benefit Los Angeles fire victims, because that's how the whole live stream thing started for us, was people helping us out. So we were like, let's do something to help them out. And the Anchorheads came together in an incredible way for that. I mean, it's been so rewarding. One of my favorite things about our band, honestly.
Your band formed in the iconic music town of Atlanta, Georgia. How much has Atlanta inspired your musical sensibility as a band, despite your focus on the SoCal-inspired yacht rock genre?
Atlanta is pretty underrated for rock and roll music. There was a real scene when I first moved here, like a bunch of bands that probably should have made it, that the Kings of Leon made it instead, you know? And I mean, seriously, like a bunch of bands that I think probably would have done more with being big than the Kings of Leon did. I think the Kings of Leon are fine, but yeah. Atlanta has just such a wide talent pool. Like, the musicians here are incredible. Like, you need a great oboe player, I can get you one in 5 minutes. Like, the music scene here is awesome, and I don't know that we could have done this in another place. There was something about the wealth of musicians that were available and the scarcity of people doing things like we were doing that made this special to Atlanta. I don't know. It's difficult to put a finger on, but I'm glad we're here.
And I'm glad you guys have that, because there was definitely an element that when I came away from your show, I knew where you were from. It either was brought up in passing or it's there. It's not that you're some cheap facsimile of what was. It's like we are a thing in and of ourselves. We are this band. We're from Atlanta, and this thing has grown. And I think that adds the element of humanity to it, more than just like, oh, you know, I'm listening to my stereo and listening to music. I love that part about it. So your backup singers, Kesha and Courtney, are a mother-daughter duo. Are there any other musical family connections in the band?
Yeah, so Keisha and Courtney are mom and daughter. Peter and I are not brothers, although we are commonly mistaken for brothers. We
Really?
have known each other since fourth grade.
Wow.
We grew up in Columbus, Indiana together. We do have another pair of brothers, however. Greg and Ganesh are twins. Ganesh plays drum. We have a platoon drummer situation where sometimes it's Jason and sometimes it's Ganesh. But when it's Ganesh, we've got Greg and Ganesh twins. But people always think that Monkey Boy is Greg's twin. So there's a lot of family vibes running through. I think it's kind of like one of those things where when people live with a dog for long enough, they start to look like their dog. I think we're all kind of that way. We're the Yacht Rock version of that.
Do you have any throw in to the idea that the idea of the band is somewhat declining? I keep seeing these clickbait titles. Solo artists are gracing the top of the charts and bands are declining and bands are declining. You play in a clearly Yacht Rock Revue band. What's your take on decline of the idea of a band ultimately?
I mean, it's certainly happening, and I think has been 2 steps forward, 1 step back with that since the 80s, right? Like, I think that is the trend. However, I think there's something magical about the chemistry of real people playing on stage together. You know, Taylor Swift is a solo artist, but she has a great band. I just went to see Billie Eilish with my daughter. Incredible band that she has working with her. And while the focus is on the soloist, I think people still want to come to the show and feel that chemistry of the musicians connecting on stage and making that music and putting their own personal input into the overall sound. And I think that's what draws people to our show, because we're that in a very clear and obvious way on stage.
Do you feel like going to a concert had some like very deep meaning to us, and is that on the decline? Because I'm wondering, you do a lot of live shows. You've seen a lot of what the concerts mean to people from the performer standpoint, and especially since it's like this thing has grown. Do you think that there's an element to like the iPod era, this solo experience that we have that is the opposite of going to a concert, and is the solo listening experience overpowering that need or want for people to go to a live show?
I mean, I think there's always a time and place to listen to music on your own in your bedroom, you know, have private moments with it. But there is something fully spiritual about the experience of being in a room, in a loud room with a bunch of other people, all focused on the same thing, all hearing the same thing and feeling the same emotions that the song brings up collectively at the same time. There's something uniquely human about that I don't think any screen is going to replace anytime soon. I hope I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I know. Me too. It would be a terrible thing. Terrible thing. I think that's all my questions. Do you, at the end of the show here, I would like to ask if there anything that you'd like the audience to know about what you got going on?
Yacht Rock Revue's on the Yacht Rock Forever tour. From now through the end of the year, we'll be coming somewhere near you, I promise. So come check us out and let's have some fun together. And if you don't have the chance, or if you need something between now and then, check out Escape Artist on Apple Music or Spotify, wherever you listen to music.
And if they want to find more about your band, what website would they go to?
yachtrockrevue.com, or you can check us out on the Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the things. Wherever you are, we're there.
All right. Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the great questions.
Yeah. The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes parttimeaudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA newsletter, and audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter. executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. The Occasional Podcast and its original associated music is monitored, mixed, and mastered on the Focal Trio 6 BE Studio monitors. AI songs produced by Udio.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.